Greetings, mortals. It is I, Luther, here with another episode of Tapes of the Lost. Tonight we travel to two places where the land itself seems to hunger for those who dare to enter. In our first story, a peaceful hiking trip in Siberia turns into a scene of unexplainable brutality and horror. Then, we learn about the twisted fates of men seeking the riches of the gold rush in the Canadian wilderness, discovered decapitated, headless, their skulls never found. Two stories, two places that do not forgive trespassers, and one burning question. What waits for those who step too far into the unknown?
Siberia, a place where winter never truly dies. Even in summer, the air carries a sharpness, a reminder that the land is older than time and colder than death. In August 1993, a 23-year-old mountaineer named Lyudmila Korovina led 6 young hikers into the Khamar-Daban Mountains. The group was experienced, strong, confident. They had no idea what was waiting for them. The first few days were perfect. The weather was calm, the path was steady, and the forests around them were alive with birdsong. On August 4th, they made camp near a stream. That night, everything changed. The morning of August 5th began like any other. The hikers gathered around their camp, eating breakfast, chatting about the next leg of the trip. Then, suddenly, one of them collapsed. He started screaming, clutching his throat, his eyes wide with terror. Blood poured from his nose and mouth. His muscles seized. He thrashed violently. Then, another hiker dropped. Then another. Lyudmila watched, helpless as her students began dying around her. Their faces twisted into expressions of unimaginable terror. Their skin turned blue, their bodies convulsing violently before going still. One hiker, running blindly, clawed at his own throat, his eyes wide, mouth stretched into a silent scream. Only one remained standing, Valentina Utochenko, the youngest of the group. Valentina was frozen in horror. Her friends, her mentor, all dead within minutes. Lyudmila, still alive, tried to crawl toward her, but something in her eyes had changed. Her pupils were dilated, her skin pale, almost stretched too tight. She reached out to Valentina, but before she could say anything, her body seized violently. Then, she too was gone. Valentina had no time to mourn, because she wasn't alone. Something was moving in the trees, watching, waiting. Valentina didn't wait to find out what it was. She ran. She ran through the forest, through the darkness, through the silence of the dead. She ran until her legs gave out, until her lungs burned, until she could no longer hear the screaming in her own head. And somehow, against every impossible odd, she survived. When rescue teams arrived, they found exactly what Valentina had described. Bodies contorted in terror, expressions of pure horror frozen on their faces. No external injuries, no animal attacks, no avalanche, no storm. The autopsies, they made no sense. Extreme internal bleeding, but no wounds. Massive brain hemorrhages, but no skull fractures. One hiker had bitten through his own tongue. Another had clenched their fists so tightly their nails had pierced their palms. Theories spread like wildfire. Poisonous water? No. The same water source was tested, completely clean. An unknown virus? Impossible. No signs of infection. Paranormal forces? A government cover-up? A military experiment gone wrong? Or something else? Something in the air, something invisible, something waiting. Nahanni Valley lies in the Northwest Territories of Canada, a stretch of land so vast, so untouched, that it may as well be another world. Dense forests, jagged mountains, endless rivers. It is a place where nature reigns, and man is an intruder. For centuries, the Dean people spoke of this valley with a quiet, haunted reverence. They called it the Land of Evil, a place where spirits move unseen, where figures lurk in the shadows of the cliffs, where the wind carries voices that don't belong to the living. And then, the bodies started turning up. In 1908, brothers Willie and Frank McLeod set out into the Nahanni Valley in search of gold. They weren't the first. The promise of untouched riches had drawn men into the valley before, but few ever returned. Years passed. The brothers never came home. Then, in 1908, their bodies were found along the river, or rather, what was left of them. Their corpses lay rotting along the banks of the South Nahanni River. Their bodies were intact. Their heads were missing. The skulls were never found. Their cause of death, never determined. Locals said the valley had claimed them, that something had taken them, but no one knew what. And if they did, they weren't talking. After the McLeod brothers, more prospectors entered the valley and more men went missing. In 1917, a Swiss prospector named Martin Jorgensen built a cabin deep in the valley. He sent letters home about his gold discoveries, about the wealth he was about to bring back with him. The next time anyone saw his cabin, it was burned to the ground. Jorgensen's charred skeleton was found inside, his head gone. No tracks, no signs of a struggle, just another body without a skull. Then, in 1945, a miner named John O'Brien was found frozen to death, still sitting by his campfire. His hands were clenched so tightly around his rifle that they had to be broken apart. His head was still there, but his face, it was locked in an expression of terror so extreme that even seasoned investigators were shaken, and still, no one had answers. The disappearances continued. Theories began to spread. Some blamed wild animals, a grizzly bear attack, a wolf pack, a predator that had learned to take heads. But no one had ever seen animals do this. The beheadings were too clean, too deliberate. Others claimed it was tribal retribution, that the Dean people had been protecting their land, driving outsiders away. But the Dean were just as terrified as the outsiders. They warned people not to go into the valley. They spoke of shadows that moved when no one was looking, whispers that came from the trees. And then there were the more unbelievable theories, that the valley hides something ancient, that the men who vanish are taken by something watching from the mountains, that deep within the valley, in the caves, there are things that don't belong to this world, and maybe the wildest theory of them all, that there really is gold in the Nahanni Valley, but it's not meant for us, and anyone who tries to take it pays the price. Even today, the Nahanni Valley remains mostly unexplored. No major settlements exist there. No roads cut through the mountains, and the disappearances haven't stopped. Pilots flying over the valley report seeing lights moving through the trees, faster than any animal should be able to move. Hikers hear screams in the wind, and still, the skulls of the beheaded men have never been found. Whatever happened in the Valley of the Headless Men, it's still happening, and maybe, just maybe, it's waiting for more.
The mountains of Khamar-Daban took 6 lives in the span of minutes. The Nahanni Valley has swallowed men for centuries, leaving behind only empty bodies. Some places were never meant for us. Some things do not wish to be found. Until next time, mortals, tread carefully. and never ignore the warnings of the dead.